Last week, this would have been a matchup against top 11 teams, but after USC's upset loss at Minnesota and chaos within college football, you've got the Penn State Nittany Lions as the number 4 ranked team in the AP poll, and the Trojans don't have a number next to their name. But don't let the numbers or lack of numbers next to these two teams' names fool you. This will be a war in the Coliseum.
From LA to Piscataway, all Big Ten all year long. This is Big Ten 10.
Some people may tell you, some people may try to convince you that this game has maybe lost a little bit of shine. It maybe lacks a little bit of luster considering what happened last week to USC and that upset loss that they took at the hands of the Golden Gophers. But I think USC is going to be a very motivated football team. I think that this is going to be a tough contest for Penn State going across the country to USC. Teams in the Big Ten so far this season that have traveled across the country, most of them, it hasn't gone well for them. The only road team that has traveled across the country and won was Indiana when they went into the Rose Bowl and took care of the UCLA Bruins earlier this season. This is a USC Trojans football team that is on the ropes. This is a season that could possibly be on the brink in this specific football game. I think that this is a huge pivot point for where USC is going to go the rest of the season. Okay, if USC is able to beat number 4 Penn State at home, all of a sudden, they are back in that college football playoff conversation. They are the first team in the also receiving votes category. They're essentially number 26 in the country. If they're able to beat a top 5 team at their house, then all of a sudden they jump up to maybe 17th in the country, 18th in the country, and maybe 19th, somewhere in that region, definitely a top 20 football team. And they've got wins on their resume over LSU. Like, what if LSU beats Ole Miss this weekend? Okay, and you got a win over Penn State. That's probably 2 wins over teams in the top 10 in the AP poll next week. All of a sudden, your resume's looking pretty good at this point. You look at the rest of the schedule for USC. They get a lot of their tougher games at the Coliseum. You take that confidence off of this win against Penn State, and now we flip back the other way for the USC Trojans. Some folks might be down on USC, but if they come out with their hair on fire and they're able to put together a complete 60-minute performance against Penn State, all of a sudden the narrative changes once again about Lincoln Riley's football team. Now you look at it on the other side. If the Trojans fall in this specific game, you're sitting there with a 4-3 record. You're sitting there with 3 Big Ten losses. If Penn State is able to do their thing and they go right at USC and USC struggles on both lines of scrimmage again like they did against Minnesota, like they've done in some games this season, I think some of the questions and maybe some of the arguments that are happening within the USC fan base, they're going to be maybe taken to another level after a loss against Penn State, and then who knows what happens the rest of the season. So, can they make that Rocky IV comeback? We're going to find out certainly. And this, whatever happens in this game for USC, I think could determine what this Cardinal and Gold squad will look like the rest of the season. Now, before I get into my main 3 storylines, there's one matchup that I really want to talk about that I think could be one of the big determining factors on which way this game swings between the Nittany Lions and the Trojans. And it's Penn State's ability to run the football. Like, you look at last week and what Minnesota was able to do running the football against USC. I think Penn State and Minnesota are actually built pretty similarly. It's just Penn State has a lot better talent than Minnesota. So USC has to know that they're taking on maybe a similar-ish makeup type of squad, just with bigger and badder personnel up front and on this entire football team at Penn State. USC gives up the 2nd most rushing yards on the ground in the Big Ten. Penn State rushes for the 3rd most yards in the Big Ten this season. I think Penn State is going to look to do some nasty work up front. I think that they're going to look to run the football. I think they're going to look at that last week's game tape against Minnesota. They're going to look to wear down USC up front and keep USC's biggest and sharpest sword on the sideline. And that being, hey, this is a Lincoln Riley football team. It's the quarterback. It's the offense. This week, I described Penn State's offense as methodical. I described them as such after that win, that 21-7 win over Illinois as well. Is it the sexiest offense in the world? No, but they wear teams down and they make plays as this game gets into the third quarter. As this team and as this game gets into the fourth quarter, certainly as well. So can USC withstand that? I think that's the big time question, because Penn State can utilize the run game in multiple ways. They can just line up in the early downs and run it at you to set up some throw game stuff down the field. And we've also seen it this season where Penn State can throw to set up some run lanes to get more of those explosive runs with someone like Nick Singleton. We know Katron Allen is more of the thunder to Nick Singleton's lightning this season. So they can do it in a variety of ways. I think if you're USC, and look, I know Drew Aller, he's a lot more comfortable. He's a lot more confident in this offense. They're getting more bigger 20-plus yard plays, 15-plus yard plays down the field. But if I'm USC, I think I want to get them into third and longs. I want to get them into those heavy pass play call type of situations for Andy Kotelnicki and see if I can get pressure on Drew Aller. I want to try to mimic, what these defenses did last year, trying to get Penn State off schedule. I know that the Penn State offense is very different this year with Andy as the OC, but I think that's what I'm looking for USC. The Trojans need to find a way to contain this run game. If Penn State is just able to line up and pound the rock and pound the football, it could be a long afternoon for the USC Trojans. Okay, now let's get into some of my storylines in this specific matchup. Now, I talked about that running game for Penn State where they're trying to run the football as a big-time matchup in this game. I think another big-time matchup, personally, I think it's the biggest matchup, is the USC pass protection against the Penn State pass rush. We knew coming into the season, you got some dogs up front for Penn State on the defensive line. Abdul Carter moving from linebacker to defensive end. Dennis Sutton. And then you look at Zane Durant, who's been really good as of late so far. This is a Penn State team that has really gotten that group together these last couple of games within the Big Ten Conference. Penn State has 9 of their 13 sacks. Now they got 7, count them 7, against Illinois. 9 of their last 13 sacks in the last 2 games. They've got 20 out of their 35 tackles for loss, 13 against Illinois. They had a really good game against the Illini, if you haven't figured that out already. That was in their last 2 games as well, versus Illinois and versus UCLA. So this is a Penn State front that is really starting to get after it. This is a Penn State front that is really starting to wreak havoc. Now you look at it on the other side. Now, USC isn't giving up the most sacks in the world. They've given up 8 sacks. That's still a number you want to try to shrink, certainly, at this point in time. But it's certainly not the worst number in college football. But if you kind of look a little bit deeper and you've watched some of these USC games, you know that this is a Trojans team that at times has struggled specifically at the tackle position. Elijah Page hasn't really developed, I think, to what they want at one of the tackle spots. Mason Murphy isn't showing a ton of improvement right now. And when USC's offense has really been held in check, it's because of the weakness in pass protection. It's because of the offensive tackles. When teams are able to get in the face of Miller Moss and get pressure on number 7 in Cardinal and Gold, that's when the USC offense maybe starts to not be as explosive and not as dynamic as they really want to be this season. Now, the big question is, right, there might be a mismatch here when you talk about Penn State's pass rush against USC's pass protection. What do the Trojans have to do to try to neutralize that? Because I think that's what Lincoln Riley is really trying to figure out in this game. One way to neutralize it, short, quick passing concepts. This is possibly a big-time opportunity for Zachariah Branch to have a big-time performance. We've seen it a little bit so far this season, those short screen stuff and some of those concepts that are where they're trying to get Zachariah Branch in space and take advantage of his speed, take advantage of his electricity. I think that's going to be something that USC is going to look to specifically to try to get him in space, try to get him on one-on-one matchups against Penn State defensive backs. See if he can break a tackle. See if he can break a couple of tackles to be able to keep on moving the chains and gain some momentum for USC down the field. Now, another thing I think that they need to try to do, they need to try to run the football. All right? They rushed for over 170 yards against Minnesota. I thought the run game was fairly successful. Woody Marks had a good day running the football in Minneapolis, Minnesota. But here's the thing. Penn State's pretty good at defending the run. This is a Nittany Lions defense that is second in the Big Ten in defending the run. They are giving up just 76 yards per game on average. They are only bested in the B1G by Ohio State, giving up 72 yards per game on average. So we talk about how good that this front is in a pass rush situation, pinning their ears back and getting pressure on the quarterback, making tackles behind the line of scrimmage. And that's the front. But then I think you go to that next group, you go to the linebackers. There's a reason why Penn State felt comfortable moving an all Big Ten linebacker and Abdul Carter over to defensive end because of the depth that they have in this linebacker room. Tony Rojas is good. Kobe King is good. Dominic DeLuca is good. Look, they've got good personnel. So I think USC's got to try to find a way to maybe get a little bit creative with their run concepts in this game, because if Miller Moss is dropping back 40, 45 times in this game, I don't think that's a recipe for success. I think you need to try to be balanced, because you need to try to keep this pass rush at bay where they just can't pin their ears back all afternoon long and come after you, knowing that the pass is coming more often than not. You need to try to mix in some short passing game. You need to try to mix in some run game to try to get this Penn State defense as off balance as you can. Personally, I think Penn State has some big-time advantages in this particular matchup. I think that they have much better talent on the edges than USC does at the tackles right now. I think they're going to be able to get after Miller Moss in this game. I think there's a high probability that they cause disruption and they get USC off schedule in this game. And I think there's also a pretty good possibility that they contain Woody Marks, Quentin Joyner, and this USC run game as well. But if USC wants to be able to hang around in this game, I think that they need to be able to get those things going. Now, let's head to another story, or shall we call it a tale. Let's talk about some turnover tales right now. Look, it's obvious. Coaches talk about it every single week. We need to win the turnover battle. Well, Captain Obvious is on a ship maybe a couple islands away from where USC is playing right now, because it maybe hasn't been so obvious, because the Trojans have been turning the football over, and Penn State is as good as anybody at protecting the football, not only in the Big Ten, but maybe in all of college football as well. USC has 8 turnovers in the last 3 games. Penn State has 3 turnovers all season, and they have a goose egg 0 turnovers in these last 2 games against Illinois and UCLA within the Big Ten Conference. Like, what do we know about Drew Aller? If we know one thing, you can say, you can talk about arm strength, you can talk about arm talent, accuracy, you can talk about pocket awareness, you can talk about all these things about Drew Aller. The haters can say anything they want about 15 in blue and white, but there's one thing that they can't say. They can't say that he puts his teams in harm's way. He protects the football. He gives Penn State a chance to win every single game because he doesn't give the ball to the other team. USC, I believe, because of these facts, I think USC needs to put up a goose egg in the turnover column to stay in this game. Now, there could be a situation, hey, maybe they just turn it over once, they fumble it, near midfield, and, maybe it's a longer field for Penn State, that kind of thing. But to be honest with you, the way Penn State plays and how methodical that they are on offense, just matriculating the ball down the field. You give them short fields in this game, and that's a disaster waiting to happen. Penn State protects the ball well. So I think if you turn the ball even over just one time, that could be detrimental to USC making this a football game in the fourth quarter. So the Trojans need to hold on to the ball. And then if I'm Penn State, if I'm Tom Allen, if I'm this defense, I'm coming after these tackles, of course, because I got a big matchup there, but I'm looking to go after the ball when I'm getting in there on Miller Moss. I'm looking for strip sacks. I'm waiting for these defensive backs to be advantageous. If I can get pressure on the passer, force Miller Moss to maybe throw the ball earlier than he wants to. If the Nittany Lions are aggressive in their coverages, there's a chance that they can get the ball to Deuce Robinson over the top. They can get the ball to Kyron Hudson. They can get the ball to Jacoby Lane and take advantage and try to hit some big plays. I got a feeling that USC is going to have to hit some big plays in this game. I don't think you can match methodical with methodical. I think that they need to get explosive down the field and try to take advantage of what Penn State has in the secondary. Now, that requires timing. When you have longer developing routes down the field, it requires better protection, which leads us back to that point once again with the matchup advantage with Penn State on the defensive line as compared to USC in pass protection on their offensive line. But the Trojans have shown at times this year where they can make adjustments when the defense shows what they're doing for a little bit in the game. They can make adjustments. They can figure things out on the offensive line and give Miller Moss time to throw. Both of these teams are stars, and stars specifically in the second half of football games. Both teams have played tremendous in the latter frame after the halftime break so far this season. Penn State has allowed 17 points in the second half all season long. They are fourth in the country in second half points allowed per game with just 3.4. Penn State has not allowed a single point in the third quarter all year. You look at it for USC, they have scored 94 of their 154 points in the second half this season. That is 61% of their points they have scored after halftime. Now, kind of the one thing that's kind of the outlier is last week, where USC started slow. Okay, they've gotten off to some slow starts this season. They started slow, but Minnesota did a good job at keeping them at bay even into the second half. And USC didn't have that explosive half that they did against Wisconsin, outscoring the Badgers 28-0, that they did against Michigan, being able to get back into that football game. Like they trailed Wisconsin and Michigan by 11 points in each of those two games at the halftime break. USC needs to come out and they need to start strong. They need to try. When we talk about explosive plays, USC needs to try to hit those big plays early on in this game. And I think that really goes into maybe going against what Penn State really wants to do as well. I think Penn State, like I looked at them in that game against Illinois, when they had that 7-point lead, I think that they were comfortable sitting on it, playing more methodical, and controlling the game with the advantage. USC needs to try to get Penn State behind the 8 ball a little bit. They need to try to get them out of their comfort zone. They need to get the Nittany Lions behind. A hot start is absolutely necessary for this USC team. You come out and you play slow like you did against some of these teams so far this season. A good, disciplined team, hard-nosed team like Penn State, they're going to take advantage. And they're going to put you out in the second half. And then maybe they can certainly build on that lead. So hitting big, explosive plays early in this game is a big-time key for the USC Trojans. Now, when I look at this thing as a whole, you consider all of these things that Penn State has to do. You consider all of these things that USC has to do. I just think Penn State has a lot of matchup advantages, folks. I think that they can run the ball fairly well in this game. I think that they can do things similar to what Minnesota was able to do in the run game. And then that opens up their throw game down the field. I think Tyler Warren is a big-time matchup nightmare for USC defensively. I could see 44 in blue and white having a pretty good game. And then I look at some of these matchups that we talked about. Penn State running the football against that USC defense. We talk about the pass rush. Penn State absolutely getting it after it as of late. USC having some big-time problems protecting Miller Moss. I think that favors the Nittany Lions. I think that they're going to be able to pin their ears back. I think that they're going to be able to eat up front against the Trojans in this particular game. Folks, prediction time. I think USC is a very motivated football team. Their backs are against the wall. If they still want to be able to get into this postseason playoff at the end of the year, they need to win this game. This is a must win game for the Trojans if that's what they still aspire to do by season's end. I think USC comes out hot in this football game, but as both teams kind of settle into the atmosphere at the Coliseum, I just think too many matchups favor the Penn State Nittany Lions in this game. I just think that they can do too many things and win in too many ways against the Trojans. I think Penn State wins. They cover by a half a point. I've got the Nittany Lions 27 and the Trojans 21. I want to hear what you guys think. Do you agree with my prediction? And what about some of these matchups that I talked about in this preview? Leave all of your thoughts, Nittany Lions and Trojans, in the comments below. I'm Big Ten Ted. We will see you in the next one.
Thanks for watching Big Ten Ted, where it's all Big Ten all year long. Make sure to like the video to spread the word of Big Ten Ted to the masses, and subscribe to the channel for updates on Big Ten content that drops every day.